Welcome back everyone. So today we're going to be talking about a upcoming camera that hopefully will be released end of this year or potentially early next year. Before that, let's just quickly talk about how amazing the Canon R3 is. It's just been released. Quite a lucky handful of people have actually just had a dip into it and tested it out, and obviously tested out all of the new features such as the eye autofocus and of course the amazing frames per second it can actually shoot. But of course that camera is dedicated for fast action sports photographers. That's it essentially. I don't think wedding photographers or normal folks like myself would actually get that particular camera, and that's the reason why I think it can justify the price tag of that, because it is a specialized camera. But today we're going to be talking about a camera that's more for the average people. We're talking about the Canon R8. So let's get into it. So of course with the Canon R5 and R6 along with the C70 later on, those were dedicated RF bodies that have actually just kind of really took the world by storm, to be honest. I mean, they've all got amazing specs. However, the M50 has always been more of a vlogger's content creator type of folks. So essentially those type of people would be bound to actually go for the M6 or the M50, to be honest. Now with the M50, I think they did miss out a hell of a lot of feature, and I think they did it simply because the M6 was still about. However, now that the M6 and of course the M50 is well and truly dead, because they, by the looks of it, all are going to go in hard with the RF mount. So of course I saw that with the first cinema camera, which is the C70, that had the RF mount, and it looks like the red Komodo is also the RF mount as well. So that leaves us with the R8. Would Canon still be doing, you know, the usual crippling that camera heavily so that it won't actually touch the cells on the R6 and the R7, or would they actually give it its dedicated feature? We're going to be talking about all of the wish lists that I'm actually thinking that Canon will actually need to do, and I've actually written it down because I thought long and hard about it, because it's got a lot of competitors coming into that field now. I mean, Sony's already got the ZV-E10 out, smashing it, absolutely fantastic. It does have, by the looks of it, a recycled sensor, but what it actually gives for the consumer is amazing. And obviously it also has a flipper screen, which is, you know, still rare, to be honest, in Sony's world. But I've made a wish list of all of the feature that the Canon R8 definitely needs to have, because it will be one of the first APS-C censored camera body that has the RF mount. So it needs to actually come out swinging, because so far it actually didn't really do anything wrong apart from the overheating on the R5 and the R6, but the C70 is absolutely amazing. To be fair, the R5 and R6 is amazing for the price tag. So let's get into the R8. Let's talk about the sensor. It needs to have a brand new sensor. I don't know what APS-C sensor it will copy, because I can't copy the M6 because I think that's going to be reserved for the R7. So it can't definitely copy the M50 because that was horrendous. Sensor on that is ridiculous, especially since it needs to have 4K. Even though the M50 had 4K, it did had quite a lot of issues with that 4K. First of all, it didn't have autofocus, and then second of all, it had a crop on top of that. Not only that, it had the worst warping effect on that sensor, like the R6 and R5, and of course the 1DX as well. It needs to have that processor simply because it needs to be able to deal with 4K without any issues, and potentially no crop with autofocus. That will essentially future-proof that Canon R8 for whatever Nikon and Panasonic will actually come out. Now let's just talk about 4K, okay? Canon M50 was a 1080p camera. No matter what people actually say, no matter what it actually says on the box itself, it is not a 4K camera. It's not usable. Like I've mentioned, it had crazy rolling shutter on that. It had crazy crop on top of the APS-C crop already. And at the end of the day, it didn't even have autofocus as well. So that practically made that extremely hard to actually use that 4K on that Canon M50. So the new Canon R8 needs to have at least 4K 30. That's the bare minimum. If it actually has 4K 60 with a crop, that potentially okay. People can actually get by that, okay? At least I can understand that, because then it won't at least hurt the cells on the Canon R6. But then again, that camera is going to be out for 2 years by the time the Canon R8 will be released. But then again, 4K 30 up to 30 included with the 24 frames per second needs to be the standard. If it can actually do that, well done. But the thing is, it needs to be able to do that with no crop and at the same time it needs to have autofocus. It needs to be able to actually utilize that, because people that are going to be one-man band are going to be holding the camera up in front and essentially use that camera on its own and relying on autofocus. 1080p 120 frames per second. Standard. If they're going to start implementing that, bravo, but it should have been there from the Canon M50 days. But again, I don't think they're going to be doing 4K 120 frames per second, because even the Canon R6 doesn't even have that. That's mainly only reserved for the Canon R3 now, and of course the R5. Like I've mentioned, it needs to have the Digic 10 processor to be able to actually utilize all of the 4K capability, and on top of that, it needs to actually be able to do something better as well, and that is low light performance. Canon M50 was horrendous. You can actually slap 1.2 lenses on it, f1.2s, f1.4s, and it would still be really, really bad in low light. No matter what type of denoiser you're going to be able to use, it's still not sharp enough to actually be able to use in low light. Now we're talking natural low light, we're not talking midnight. It needs to be able to actually be used through all days and nights occurrence. So people that are going to be actually using it at daytime and nighttime, it needs to have some sort of really good low light performance. I'm not saying it needs to rival the R5 and R6, but at least if it's just about there, then at least it's going to be good enough. I haven't actually touched upon the IBIS as well. I don't think they're going to implement IBIS in the Canon R8. I think that's going to be more reserved for the Canon R7. I really do think that the R7 would be able to actually utilize the IBIS properly, since it is a wildlife photographer camera. But then again, the RF lenses, most of them actually do come with stabilization anyways, so I don't think they're going to actually focus on IBIS whatsoever in regards to the Canon R8. I think that's going to be more reserved for the Canon R3, 5, 6 and 7. Let's just quickly talk about the stills department. Let's not forget, it is a Canon after all. I think it's going to have the exact same mechanical shutter speed as the Canon R5 and R6. There's no surprise there. I think they're going to match that, but I don't think they're going to be able to actually utilize the silent mode. I think they're not actually going to implement that in the Canon R8. If they do, that's really good, but if they don't, I wouldn't be too shocked about that. I think they're going to be leaving it at around about 10 frames per second. I think that's going to be the sweet spot for the Canon R8. With that, I think they're going to be able to actually add now all types of autofocus control, like they've actually implemented on the Canon M50 Mark II, but I think they're going to be able to add eye autofocus with that as well. And the reason being is because the Digic 10 processor, that hopefully they'll be able to implement that. Let's just quickly talk about the body. I think they're just going to mimic exactly the same features as the Canon RP, but just a little bit smaller. Everything is just going to be a little bit more compact, a little bit shorter, a little bit narrower. They're just going to make it a little bit better to actually handle, but I think they're going to give it a much more deeper grip, similar to the RP, but definitely better than the Canon M50. I think they're going to completely get rid of the EFM design body. I think they're going to make it a more unified body, where all of the R7, R6, R3, they're all going to look extremely similar. Don't think it's going to have any custom buttons as well. I think it's just going to be exactly the same as the RP. No custom buttons, no dedicated buttons like the Sony ZV-E10 for the background defocusing and product showcase. I don't think that the Canon would actually copy that. I think they're just going to keep it minimalistic and clean and simple. Touchscreen, still going to be the same as the RP. Screen display, I think it's going to be exactly the hard copy of the Canon RP. EVF, again, is going to be the exact same size and dimension as the RP. I think they're just going to copy that. The R5, the EOS R and the R6, they all had a much more bigger, thicker, wider EVF, but I think that the R8 would still have the exact same EVS as the Canon RP, which isn't really that bad. It will be stock at 60 frames per second as opposed to 120 that you get in the R5 and R6. Battery, still going to be the same. I think they're not going to make a brand new battery or copy the Canon LPE6 battery. I think they're still going to be exactly the same as the Canon EOS RP. Same type of battery. I don't know the exact size of the battery. I think it's the LPE17 because the Canon M50 was the LPE12, I think. But I'll put it here, which one it is. and that's going to be the battery. I think the battery on that will be better. Capability on that battery is going to be better than the RP simply because of the efficiency coming out of the newer sensor as opposed to the Digic 8 processor that the RP actually had. I think that's about it for me, to be honest. I think Canon really needs to actually make a better go at it, essentially. I think they actually really need to do something about the R8 because the RP, the Canon M50 first and second was an absolute mess. The Canon EOS R was a better attempt. However, the 4K crop, I don't know if the Digic 8 processor was that limited that they won't be able to actually utilize the full potential on that. But the Digic 10 processor, I mean, they're still using that in the Canon R3, so it's still supposed to be really a solid processor. If they drop that in the Canon EOS R8, if they do drop that, I think 4K 30 frames per second, 1080p, 120 frames per second, no crop, with autofocus, all of that would make sense because that processor is powerful enough to actually be able to utilize all of that video capability. 10 frames per second, if they allow 20 frames per second silent mode in stills department, great. However, 10 frames per second is still good enough, and unless you're actually capturing something that's at the speed of light, I don't think you need anything faster than that, to be honest, for the simple people of content creators like myself. Now with that, I think that's going to be my conclusion. I'm not going to talk too deep into it. This is just a wish list that I think they will need to look into to actually compete with the likes of the Sony ZV-E10 and of course what Nikon and Panasonic will potentially bring out. Let's not forget the Fujifilm X-T4 is still here and it's still actually dominating the APS-C market. Canon needs to actually be able to have all of its features to at least future-proof it for the next couple of years. There's no point actually bringing out a camera to compete with something other competitor actually brought out last year and tried to compete with that. So with that, I hope you did enjoy this little video and hopefully I'll see you guys in the next one. Peace out.